Want to get more from American Scandal? Subscribe to Wondery Plus for early access to new episodes, ad-free listening, and exclusive content you can't find anywhere else. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. American Scandal uses dramatizations that are based on true events. Some elements, including dialogue, might be invented, but everything is based on historical research. A listener note: this episode contains descriptions of violence and may not be suitable for all audiences. It's April 20th, 1968, at a U.S. military base in South Vietnam. It's been just over a month since the massacre at My Lai, and the men in Charlie Company who were there that day are all handling it differently. One of them is Private Charles Butch Groover. He sits alone at a battered metal table in the mess tent, a half-empty beer sweating in his hand. His eyes are unfocused, fixed on nothing at all. Groover takes another swig, trying to drown out his thoughts, when he hears a familiar voice. "Butch!" Groover blinks out of his daze as Ron Ridenhour steps by his side. Ridenhour is a 22-year-old who shipped out to Vietnam at the same time as Groover did. He sits down. "When was the last time we saw each other? Hawaii?" Yeah. Good old Schofield Barracks. You still a door gunner?" "Yep, started in the 70th Infantry, then the 11th, about to head out to the 51st. Then got me moving around like no one's business." "Well, it could be worse." "Where'd they stick you? Still with Charlie Company?" "No, they're back near Donnie now. I got rotated out last month. Wish it'd been sooner." "What do you mean? You haven't heard about Pinkville?" Crawling with Viet Cong, right?" "Yeah, well, there weren't any when we got sent in." "You really haven't heard?" Ridenhour shakes his head. Groover glances around the mess hall and takes another drink. "Oh, God, it was this village called My Lai. Intel said everyone would be Viet Cong, but the only ones there were women and children, some old guys. Some folks got hit in the crossfire." "No, I'm not talking about crossfire. I'm talking about lined up in ditches and then executed point blank." "Jesus." I saw this one boy. God, he was tiny. 3, 4 years old. He was just standing there by the trail with these big eyes staring around like he just didn't understand. He didn't believe what was happening. Then the captain's radio guy opened up on him. Full burst, blew him away. You can't be serious. You think I'd joke about something like this? No, I guess not. And it was so bad. One of the guys in our squad even shot himself in the foot just to get medevaced out of there. That's heavy. Why didn't he just refuse? Why didn't anyone stop it? We were getting direct orders. To shoot kids? From who? Well, I didn't see this firsthand, but guys I trust did. They said Lieutenant Calley was ordering them to round up the villagers and shoot them. How many? I'm not sure. The village had to have been 300 or 400 people. I don't know if any of them made it out alive. And command is just covering it all up. But there's got to be an investigation or something, right? Groover shakes his head. They're calling it a successful operation, Ron. Successful operation. Man, these were just women and kids. In the days that follow, Ron Ridenhour can't shake the story he heard from Butch Groover. The idea of innocent civilians being slaughtered for no reason eats at him night after night. And so he begins a quiet but relentless campaign to chase down witnesses, gather testimony, and then blow the lid off a secret the U.S. Army would rather everyone forgot.
It's your man, Nick Cannon, and I'm here to bring you my new podcast, Nick Cannon at Night. Every week, I'm bringing out some of my celebrity friends and the best experts in the business to answer your most intimate relationship questions. So don't be shy. Join the conversation and head over to YouTube to watch Nick Cannon at Night or subscribe on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts.
From Wondery, I'm Lindsey Graham. And this is American Scandal. The My Lai massacre was one of the most horrific war crimes in American history. Over the course of a single morning in March 1968, U.S. Army soldiers killed more than 500 unarmed Vietnamese civilians, including women, children, and infants. And then the cover-up began. Commanders filed false reports, journalists were pressured to lie, and the official story painted an atrocity as a major victory. But not everyone stayed quiet. In the months and years after the massacre, there would be those who risked everything to expose what really happened. This is Episode 3, Hunting Down Calley. It's November 1968 at a surgical hospital in Chu Lai in South Vietnam. Ron Ridenhour walks down the narrow aisle between the beds, searching for a particular face amid the wounded men. The air smells faintly of antiseptic and mildew. Fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting a cold sheen over the cots lined in cramped rows. Ridenhour's Army service is almost over. He's due to ship out of Vietnam by the end of the year, but there's one person he needs to talk to before he leaves. He's been chasing rumors of a soldier who didn't join the killing at My Lai, and now he thinks he's found him. Private First Class Michael Bernhardt is propped up in bed on a sweat-stained pillow. His legs are raw and bandaged from jungle rot, a brutal infection that eats through the skin. Ridenhour pulls up a chair and introduces himself. Then he explains why he's there, and without much prompting, Bernhardt starts to talk. At first, Bernhardt's voice is flat and detached, but his memories are vivid. He says he watched villagers herded like cattle and machine-gunned in ditches. He saw children shot at point-blank range, and he names names, specifically Lieutenant William Calley, the man who had been giving the orders, and Captain Ernest Medina, who Bernhardt claims came up to him after the massacre and warned him to keep quiet. Bernhardt was terrified for his own life, so he nodded and agreed not to say anything, but now he knows he can't stay silent. Ridenhour shakes his head. After he first spoke to Butch Groover 6 months ago, deep down he had hoped Butch was wrong, that the chaos of the operation had twisted his memories. But since then, Ridenhour had spoken to 3 other members of Charlie Company, and now Bernhardt. They all say the same thing. My Lai was a massacre, and it's been deliberately covered up. So even though Ridenhour ships out the next month and returns home to Phoenix, Arizona, he doesn't forget what he's learned about My Lai. Groover, Bernhardt, and the others trusted him enough to tell their stories. But they were all terrified to speak out while they were still in Vietnam and at the Army's mercy. But now that Ridenhour is back on the relative safety of American soil, he's determined that those responsible for the massacre are brought to justice. In March 1969, a full year after My Lai, Ridenhour sits down at his kitchen table, lays out his notes, and begins to write a letter. It's a 5-page account of what he believes took place that morning in Vietnam. When he's finished, he sends the letter to more than 24 officials in Washington. They include President Nixon, 23 members of Congress, the Secretaries of State and Defense, the Secretary of the Army, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Then he waits. At first, nothing happens. Most of the recipients never even acknowledge the letter. But one takes it seriously. A congressman from Ridenhour's home state of Arizona reads the letter and is concerned enough to forward it to the Army's Chief of Staff, General William Westmoreland. Ridenhour then receives a letter in return from Westmoreland's office. It thanks him for bringing the My Lai matter to their attention and says it's now under investigation. Ridenhour feels like a huge weight has been lifted from his shoulders. While he's horrified about what happened in My Lai, he's still a loyal soldier. He hasn't taken his story to the press or leaked it anywhere else. He wants to believe that now the top brass is looking into the allegations, it means there will be proper accountability at last. And in late April 1969, the Army Inspector General's office does launch a full inquiry. A veteran officer named Colonel William Wilson is asked to head up the investigation. His objective is simple: determine what happened on March 16, 1968, and whether it merits a criminal investigation. Over the course of the next month, Wilson speaks with all of the men who gave their accounts to Ridenhour. Then he meets with Charlie Company Commander Ernest Medina, who gives his version of events. Captain Medina claims that the 11th Brigade's Colonel Orrin Henderson has already conducted an official investigation and found nothing wrong. But Wilson can find no trace of any such report. So he calls Colonel Henderson to Washington, D.C. to set the story straight. On May 26, 1969, Henderson sits down in the Inspector General's office across from Colonel Wilson. The walls are blank and the lights are bright. It's not an interrogation room, but it feels that way. Henderson sits in a stiff wooden chair, his officer's hat laid neatly on the table in front of him. Wilson thumbs through a thick folder of notes. The silence stretches between them. Then Wilson looks up and begins peppering Henderson with questions that are answered with practiced ease. Henderson admits that he conducted an informal investigation, but he repeats the official line that there was no civilian massacre. Instead, he insists that officers assure him that there was a brutal firefight that morning. When asked about helicopter pilot Hugh Thompson, whose account contradicts that story, Henderson suggests that Thompson is young and emotional. Likely, he was simply overwhelmed by the chaos and confused by what he thought he saw. Wilson listens and takes notes, letting Henderson talk. But the longer the interview goes on, the more Henderson begins to contradict himself. He eventually tells Wilson that there was actually another, more formal inquiry into the claims of civilian casualties led by Lieutenant Colonel Frank Barker, but nothing came of that probe either. Unfortunately for Wilson, he can't ask Barker himself about it. Not long after the My Lai operation, Barker was killed in an aircraft accident. And when Wilson goes looking for any record of Barker's supposedly formal investigation, he again finds nothing. Wilson doesn't say his suspicions out loud, though the implication seems clear enough. If there ever was a paper trail, it's been scrubbed. But Wilson isn't deterred. He continues chasing down the men from Charlie Company, and all their accounts seem to point back toward the same man, the young lieutenant from 1st Platoon, William Calley. Wilson knows that the ultimate responsibility for what happened in My Lai will be far-reaching. But according to almost every soldier Wilson talks to, Lieutenant Calley was the one rounding up the villagers, ordering his men to kill them, and pulling the trigger himself. So on June 5, 1969, Wilson formally identifies Calley as a suspect, and Calley is immediately ordered to fly back from Vietnam to the U.S. for questioning. A week later, helicopter pilot Hugh Thompson picks him out of a lineup, identifying him as one of the officers he confronted in My Lai. And then, on July 16th, Wilson interviews Private Paul Meadlow. In a moment of grim clarity, Meadlow admits to what he did in My Lai, confessing to killing unarmed civilians on Calley's orders, and with that, Wilson has all he needs. He submits his findings to the Army's Inspector General, who refers the case to the Criminal Investigation Division, or CID, making the My Lai investigation now a full-blown criminal inquiry. In August, the CID interviews former Army photographer Ronald Haberly. He and the reporter Jay Roberts were in My Lai to document the mission. Afterward, they both fell in line with the official story and kept the truth to themselves. But when the CID shows up, Haberly makes good on the promise he made a year earlier that if anyone came asking for proof of what really happened, he'd provide it. He hands over his trove of photographs showing the bodies of Vietnamese civilians piled in ditches, and for the first time, the Army has hard evidence. So a month later, 26-year-old William Calley is officially charged with 6 counts of premeditated murder. Although the Army suspects the number of his victims may be as high as 109, publicly they just release a vague statement that says Calley is being detained because of an ongoing investigation. That's enough to deflect the attention of most reporters, but not Seymour Hersh. He's a 32-year-old investigative journalist in Washington, once a rising star at the Associated Press, but having left his job there, now works for himself as a freelance reporter. And in October 1969, he's working in a cramped office on the 8th floor of the National Press Building. The walls are yellowed from years of cigarette smoke, and Hersh sits surrounded by notebooks. His head is down, working hard on a book about the Pentagon. But then the phone rings. Yep, this is Seymour Hersh. Mr. Hersh, I've got something for you. The caller is a young lawyer, new to Washington. A friend of a friend has given him Hersh's number. He doesn't want his name involved, but he's got a tip. The Army's about to court-martial a soldier down in Fort Benning in Georgia. They're keeping it quiet. Well, why's that? What for? 75 South Vietnamese shot dead. It could be more. Viet Cong? No, civilians. Women and kids, even. Hersh opens a new notebook and grabs a pen. Well, who's the soldier? I don't know. They're keeping that under wraps. But he's at Fort Benning? Yep, down in Georgia. Okay, what else? What can you give me? Any documents? Dates? Anything solid? Nope, that's all I've got. It's all just a bunch of whispers right now, but they seem pretty credible. Well, yeah. Can I talk to anyone else who might know more? Nah, I can't get anyone else involved, and keep my name out of it too, okay? They're keeping this all quiet for a reason. There's a lot of people who don't want this getting out. Seymour Hersh sits frozen in his chair for a moment, the phone still gripped in his hand. His mind is already racing. He's covered the Pentagon a good deal in the past. He knows how stories can be buried if the authorities want them to be. But a court-martial for mass murder seems like a whole different ballgame. Hersh finally drops the receiver back into its cradle, then rises from his chair, yanks on a battered overcoat, and grabs his notebook off the desk. He should forget about this phone call and focus on his book. He doesn't have a budget for this story or an editor interested in buying it. But he has something more important to him than any of that. He has a lead, and his gut is telling him to follow it.
It's your man, Nick Cannon, and I'm here to bring you my new podcast, Nick Cannon at Night. I've heard y'all been needing some advice in the love department. So who better to help than yours truly? Nah, I'm serious. Every week, I'm bringing out some of my celebrity friends and the best experts in the business to answer your most intimate relationship questions. Having problems with your man? We got you. Catching feelings for your sneaky link? Let's make sure it's the real deal first. Ready to bring toys into the bedroom? Let's talk about it. Consider this a non-judgment zone to ask your questions when it comes to sex and modern dating in relationships, friendships, situationships, and everything in between. It's gonna be sexy, freaky, messy, and you know what? You'll just have to watch the show. So don't be shy. Join the conversation and head over to YouTube to watch Nick Cannon at Night or subscribe on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. Want to watch episodes early and ad-free? Join Wondery Plus right now.
In November 1974, IRA bombs ripped through 2 Birmingham pubs, killing 21 innocent people. Hundreds more were injured. It was the worst attack on British soil since the Second World War.
When a crime this appalling and shocking happens, you want the police to act quickly. And boy, did they. The very next day, they had 6 men in custody. Confessions followed, and the men were sent down for life.
Good riddance, you might think, except those men were innocent. Join me, Matt Ford.
And me, Alice Levine.
For the latest series of British Scandal, all about the Birmingham Six.
It's the story of how a terrible tragedy morphed into a travesty of justice, and how one man couldn't rest until he'd exposed the truth.
Follow British Scandal now wherever you listen to podcasts and binge entire series early and ad-free on Wondery Plus.
After getting a tip about a potential war crime in Vietnam, investigative reporter Seymour Hersh starts digging. He goes to the usual places first, checking the military's reporting system, the public records, anything filed and forgotten that might point to trouble. But there's no sign of a massacre or any mention of misconduct at all. So he digs deeper, scouring through court records and news reports, but still he comes up empty. Then Hersh gets lucky. He's in the Pentagon chasing down military records when he bumps into an Army general. They know each other from Hersh's days at the Associated Press, before the general injured his knee and got pulled from the field. They've always been on friendly terms, and now they trade jabs and rib each other in the hallway. Hersh jokes that the general shot himself in the knee just to get promoted, and the general fires back that he heard Hersh didn't leave the AP, but got fired. The two men laugh, but Hersh is already steering the conversation where he needs it to go. And when the laughter dies down, he mentions that he's heard some nasty rumors about a massacre in Vietnam. The mood shifts suddenly, and the general shakes his head. He places his hand about knee height, and then tells Hersh, that guy Calley, he didn't shoot anyone higher than this. He just shot little kids. He deserves everything he gets. Hersh freezes. This is not just confirmation that some sort of massacre did take place. He's now also got a name. After he rushes home, Hersh calls in all his favors, trying to find out who exactly this Calley might be. When Hersh follows up with a contact in a congressional office, they warn him to stay away from the story. They say Calley is just a kid who lost it on the battlefield, and it's not worth the trouble. But Hersh doesn't listen. Instead, he pokes around some more, and eventually he finds out the name of Calley's lawyer. George Latimer isn't just any defense attorney. He's a World War II veteran and a highly respected former judge on the U.S. Court of Military Appeals, the highest court in the military justice system. Now in his late 60s, he's a partner in a law firm in Salt Lake City. So Hersh calls Latimer up, but doesn't confront him with what he knows about the massacre. He thinks he needs to win Latimer's trust, so he makes his pitch carefully. He tells Latimer that he's heard Calley's being railroaded, that the Army is using him as a scapegoat. This strategy works. Latimer bites and says yes, he's defending Calley, and yes, it is a miscarriage of justice. So Hersh tells Latimer that he'll be out west soon and asks if he can stop by the office to discuss the case in person. Latimer agrees, and in late October 1969, Hersh makes his way to Utah. It's a Wednesday morning around 10 a.m. when Seymour Hersh strolls into the law office of George Latimer in Salt Lake City. Latimer sits behind a polished oak desk, and Hersh approaches, holding out his hand. Mr. Latimer, pleasure to meet you, sir. Hersh, is it? Yeah, sit, please. It's a beautiful office you've got here. Makes my old AP desk look like a broom closet. Well, thank you. And I appreciate you seeing me. I wanted to talk about your client, Lieutenant Calley. I hear they're keeping him at Fort Benning. Latimer peers over his thick-rimmed glasses. Well, you know I can't discuss specifics, Mr. Hersh. No, of course not. but let me ask you this. I've heard the Army offered him a plea bargain that included jail time. Is there any truth to that? The government makes offers. That doesn't mean we accept them. So you said no? I told them never. That boy was just doing what he was told. They're trying to make an example out of him. But it's the senior officers who should be on trial here, not Calley. Hersh shifts in his seat, bracing to ask his next question. Well, I've been hearing some numbers. I've been told Calley might be responsible for the death of over 150 civilians. Latimer flushes with anger. 150? Now that's a lie. Latimer pushes back from his desk and steps over to a filing cabinet. He rifles through a drawer before pulling out a single piece of paper. If you want to know what he's being accused of, here, this is what they say he did. Latimer slaps a paper on his desk. It's a charge sheet. Hersh leans forward to read it. Premeditated murder of 109 Oriental human beings? That's very specific. It's also unproven. Latimer pulls the charge sheet back toward him, but not completely out of sight. Hersh tilts his head and starts discreetly copying it onto his notepad, reading upside down while pretending to listen as Latimer goes on. You have to understand, he's a lieutenant, Mr. Hersh, just 24 years old. A boy, really, following orders in a war that makes no sense. What happened in that village was a tragedy. There's no doubt of that. No one would deny it. But we can't let the full weight of it fall on one young officer. Not when everyone up the ladder knew what was happening. Hersh looks up. So you think senior officers knew about this? Knew about it? They practically encouraged it. Seymour Hersh doesn't ask too many follow-up questions. He doesn't want to run the risk of George Latimer telling him their conversation is off the record. Instead, he shakes the lawyer's hand and turns on his heels, knowing exactly where he's off to next. On November 11th, 1969, Seymour Hersh heads to Georgia. He's convinced that Lieutenant William Calley is being hidden somewhere on the Fort Benning base while he awaits his court-martial. Fort Benning is an open facility, so gaining access isn't a problem. But the base is huge, almost the size of New York City. Between the training facilities, residential blocks, and the airfield, there's a lot of places to hide someone. But Hersh is not deterred. He's been a reporter for a long time. Finding people is what he's good at. He starts by bluffing his way into several military prisons, figuring they'll be keeping Calley in one of the holding facilities where they house soldiers awaiting trial. But he can't find him. So he stops by the military's legal offices and asks for Calley there. The sergeant at the desk tells him to stay right where he is. For a moment, Hersh thinks he might be getting somewhere, but in fact, this sergeant is under strict orders to alert a colonel if anyone comes asking about William Calley. The last thing Hersh wants is to get kicked off base before he can figure out where Calley is, so he bolts from the office before the sergeant can detain him. But he's no closer to finding Calley. He keeps searching and eventually gets a tip from a GI who handles Calley's mail. That leads him to Calley's personnel file, and in that, Hersh finds a local address. By the time Hersh reaches the condo listed in the file, it's nearly 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He's been on the move all day and is a bit exhausted, but he knows it'll be worth it if he can finally find Calley. But he doesn't. A group of young Army officers lives at that address, but Calley isn't one of them. They say he moved out weeks ago. Hersh sighs. He feels like he's hitting one dead end after another. Seeing his tired and disappointed face, the officers invite him in for a drink because he looks like he needs one. Hersh accepts, and over a glass of cheap bourbon, one of the officers reveals Calley's new location. He's bunking in quarters usually reserved for more senior men. Hersh quickly says his goodbyes and heads over to this new address. It's a complex of 2-story buildings with its own tennis court and swimming pool. With no other clues to go on, Hersh just begins knocking on doors. After several hours without success, it's getting late and he's about ready to call it a night. But as he heads across the parking lot to his car, he hears a shout from a building behind him. It's one of Calley's neighbors. He calls out that the man Hersh is looking for has finally come home. Hersh stuffs his car keys back in his pocket and turns around to race back to the complex. He finds Lieutenant William Calley standing outside. Hersh introduces himself and the two men shake hands. Then Hersh explains that he's a journalist who's come to Georgia to get Calley's side of the story. Calley likes the sound of that, and he invites Hersh upstairs to his apartment. There they sit down over beers and start talking on the record. When he first started looking for Calley, Hersh expected to find a kind of monster, but instead he discovers that the pale-faced Calley is fragile, defensive, and clearly afraid. With little prompting, he launches into his version of what really happened in Vietnam, an implausible tale of heroism under fire, full of dramatic shootouts and communist ambushes. He talks and drinks for hours. Hersh just listens and encourages him. But as Calley drinks into the dawn, his voice slurs and his story begins to unravel, growing more contradictory and less credible. Eventually, Hersh decides it's time to go. But before he leaves, Calley insists that Hersh speak with his commanding officer, Captain Ernest Medina. Medina was the one in charge of Charlie Company, and Calley insists that he was the one who gave the orders at My Lai. Calley grabs his phone and dials his former captain's number, positive that Medina will back up his story. But when Medina answers and hears what Calley is asking, he flatly denies everything. He says he has no idea what Calley is talking about, then hangs up. Calley stares at the phone in his hand, the dial tone droning. He looks stunned, because in that moment it seems to Hersh that Calley has finally realized something. His commanding officers are not going to back him up, and he's going to be the one left holding the bag for what they all did in the village of My Lai.
Hi, I'm Denise Chan, host of Scam Factory. You might remember hearing about our investigative series that exposed what's really happening behind those suspicious texts you get. Inside heavily guarded compounds across Asia, thousands are trapped and forced to scam others or risk torture. One of our most powerful stories was Jella's, a young woman who thought she'd found her dream job, only to end up imprisoned in a scam compound. Her escape story caught the attention of Criminal's Phoebe Judge, and I'm honored to share more details of Jella's journey with their audience. But Jella's story is just one piece of this investigation. In Scam Factory, we reveal how $1 billion criminal empire turns job seekers into prisoners, and how the only way out is to scam your way out. Ready to uncover the full story? Binge all episodes of Scam Factory now. Listen to Scam Factory on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts.
On Boxing Day 2018, 20-year-old Joy Morgan was last seen at her church, Israel United in Christ, or IUIC.
I just went on my Snapchat and I just see her face plastered everywhere.
This is The Missing Sister, the true story of a woman betrayed by those she trusted most.
IUIC is my family and like the best family that I've ever had.
But IUIC isn't like most churches.
This is a devilish cult.
You know when you get that feeling where you just, I don't want to be here. I want to get out. It's like that feeling of, like, I want to go hang out.
I'm Charlie Brinkhurst-Cuff, and after years of investigating Joy's case, I need to know, what really happened to Joy? Binge all episodes of The Missing Sister exclusively and ad-free right now on Wondery Plus. Start your free trial of Wondery Plus on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or in the Wondery app.
After tracking Lieutenant William Calley down to his hiding spot on Fort Benning, journalist Seymour Hersh believes he secured the scoop of a lifetime. now he just has to get the story out. But that won't be easy. His interview with Calley is explosive, and anyone who publishes it will likely feel the wrath of the White House and the Pentagon, as well as their lawyers. But Hersh has no intention of softening the allegations. He wants a publisher with the guts to run the story as is. Hersh starts with the big names first, but the editors at Life and Look magazines both turn him down. His contacts over at the New York Review of Books are more interested, but they want to shape the piece into something overtly anti-war, and Hersh refuses to editorialize. He's not trying to score political points with this. He believes the horror of My Lai can speak for itself. So in the end, he gives up on the national publishers, and he takes the story to a smaller outfit called Dispatch News Service. Based in Washington, they've only been up and running for a year, and their editor is just 23 years old. But unlike the other outlets, they agree to publish Hersh's story without any edits, and it goes out on November 13th, 1969. Dispatch News copyrights the story and takes full legal responsibility for the allegations Hersh makes. That opens the door for other newspapers to run the story, including the Boston Globe, the Chicago Sun-Times, and the Washington Post, which publishes an edited version of the report on its front page. But not everyone jumps on board. The New York Times doesn't run the story, nor do any of the major television networks. They're more cautious because there's no hard proof in Hersh's article to back up the allegations, and the Pentagon isn't giving any comment either. Still, that doesn't stop people from hearing about the story. The public is split in their reaction. For anti-war protesters, it's proof of everything that is wrong with America's involvement in Vietnam. But for those who still support the war, it's an unfair attack on U.S. troops doing their best in an impossible situation. Many military men come forward to defend Calley, and top politicians question Hersh's motives in even publishing the story. Even some fellow journalists accuse him of sensationalism. For many of them, it seems the idea that U.S. soldiers could carry out such an atrocity is just too painful or unpatriotic to accept. But despite the backlash, Hersh isn't finished with the My Lai story yet. Other soldiers who served along Lieutenant Calley and Charlie Company come forward with another name and a new lead, Private First Class Paul Meadlow. He's a farm kid who apparently followed Calley's orders and mowed down scores of Vietnamese villagers. Hersh knows that if America is going to face up to what happened at My Lai, it can't be reduced to a single villain or one rogue lieutenant. So Hersh now heads to the Midwest, to the quiet town of New Goshen, Indiana, looking for the bigger truth. Hersh glances down at the address scrawled in his notebook as he drives down a long stretch toward a ramshackle family farm. He parks his rental car out front. A woman comes out to greet him, and when Hersh explains why he's come, she points him to a second, smaller home on the property. Hersh makes his way into a kitchen where Paul Meadlow is pouring himself a coffee. With his soft face and glasses, he doesn't look much like a killer. He glances up at Hersh. "Can I pour you a cup? I just made it." "Yeah, sure, thanks, and I appreciate you letting me come by." "Well, not much else going on around here. It's peaceful, that's for sure. Well, guess I needed some of that. Here you go." Meadlow hands Hersh a cup of coffee. They both take a seat at the kitchen table. "Okay, well, why don't we start kind of easy? Tell me about yourself. You're 22 now, right? Married?" Yeah. Before I even went out to Vietnam, we've got 2 kids, a 2-year-old boy, and we just had a daughter." "Wow, congratulations." "Yeah, well, thanks. They keep me grounded, when I start remembering things." "Yeah, I can imagine. My wife, she doesn't ask too many questions. I think she's scared to know." "That's pretty common. What have you been doing since getting home?" "Well, I've got myself a job at the factory. It's not the easiest. I've still got this." Meadlow pulls up his pant leg, showing a prosthetic. "Yeah, mind me asking how that happened?" "Yeah, sure. My lieutenant ordered us to go down an uncleared path and a mine exploded. Blew my foot right off. I spent months in an army hospital in Japan, but it'll never be right." "And would the lieutenant who gave you that order be William Calley by any chance?" "Yes, it would." "You're not his biggest fan?" "It is a miracle that guy didn't get us all killed." Meadlow looks down. "I thought it was a sign when the mine went off." "A sign? A sign of what?" I just remember thinking maybe it was God punishing us for what we did." "You mean at My Lai?" Meadlow nods. "But then I thought, why me and why not Calley, for Christ's sake?" "Well, he's getting court-martialed now. I guess that's something." "You don't sound sure. I mean, what does it matter now?" Folks either don't believe it or don't want to hear it. They're just going to let them get away with everything, just sweep it all under the rug. Well, maybe not. I mean, if you're loud enough, they won't be able to ignore you. You really think so? I know, if you're ready to tell me what happened that day. Paul Meadlow eventually gives Seymour Hersh an on-the-record eyewitness account of what he did at My Lai. And once he starts talking, he doesn't want to stop. Soon after his interview with Hersh, Meadlow agrees to repeat his story on national television. In an appearance on CBS News, Meadlow confesses to killing women, children, and even babies. His interview strips away any lingering doubt the public may have about what happened at My Lai. His flat, haunting voice forces Americans to confront the massacre not as a rumor, but as a reality. And with every new revelation about the My Lai massacre, public shock and outrage grow, and attention turns to the Pentagon. Many Americans suspect the military's top brass is trying to conceal the truth, that the full story has yet to emerge. So in Washington, there are hastily arranged meetings about how to respond and how the Army can recover from this crisis. Saying nothing is no longer an option, as the public's faith in the military is wavering. Congress is now demanding answers as well, so something has to be done. On November 26, 1969, Secretary of the Army Stanley Reeser heads to Capitol Hill. The Senate Armed Services Committee has summoned him for a hearing on the massacre allegations, and he's determined to use this opportunity to finally take charge of the story. A hush falls as he takes his seat in the center of the room. A row of photographs lies face up on the long table before him. They're the pictures that Ronald Haberly took in My Lai. They show houses aflame, terrified women clutching their children, and dead bodies piled in dishes. Reeser clears his throat and begins a lengthy statement. With a deliberate and unwavering tone, he admits the truth. American soldiers committed mass murder in My Lai. The Army failed to stop it, and then they failed to investigate it properly. But then Reeser says that all changes now. He tells the senators that a new comprehensive and independent inquiry has been ordered. It is to be led by Lieutenant General William R. Pierce, a 55-year-old combat veteran with no ties to the division involved in the massacre and no tolerance for half-truths. In front of the senators, Secretary Reeser stresses that Pierce's mission is not just to establish the facts of what happened on the ground, but also to judge the adequacy of the investigations and reviews that followed. In other words, he is to establish whether there was a cover-up. After Secretary Reeser's appearance before the Senate hearing, he knows the press and public will seize on the Pierce inquiry as a turning point. For the first time, the U.S. military is acknowledging that its troops committed mass murder in My Lai. But what Reeser doesn't yet know is exactly how deep the rot goes and how close this new investigation will come to unraveling the Army from within. From Wondery, this is episode 3 of the Massacre at My Lai for American Scandal. In our next episode, Lieutenant William Calley stands trial for the murder of more than 100 civilians at My Lai. And as the nation watches, the courtroom becomes a battleground over duty, obedience, and who should bear the responsibility for the costs of war. If you're enjoying American Scandal, you can unlock exclusive seasons on Wondery Plus. Binge new seasons first and listen completely ad-free when you join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. And before you go, tell us about yourself by filling out a survey at Wondery.com/survey. If you'd like to learn more about the massacre at My Lai, we recommend the books My Lai, Vietnam, 1968, and The Descent into Darkness by Howard Jones, Cover Up by Seymour Hersh, and The Forgotten Hero of My Lai, The Hugh Thompson Story by Trent Andrews. This episode contains reenactments and dramatized details, and while in most cases we can't know exactly what was said, all our dramatizations are based on historical research. American Scandal is hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsey Graham, for Airship. Audio editing by Christian Paraga. Sound design by Gabriel Gould. Supervising sound designer Matthew Filler. Music by Thrum. This episode is written and researched by Alex Burns. Fact-checking by Alyssa Jung Perry. Managing producer Emily Burke. Development by Stephanie Jens. Senior producer Andy Beckerman. Executive producers are William Simpson for Airship and Jenny Lauer Beckman, Marshall Louie, and Aaron O'Flaherty for Wondery.